Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it's Friday afternoon. So I've put a very short presentation together which talks about design for failure in the context of cloud computing. And to all the governance, regulation and compliance experts in the room, I'm sure you're very familiar with design for failure. But we look at it in a very practical sense, looking at some lessons that came out of an outage that happened in one of Amazon's data centers in Virginia about 2 years ago, and how some companies dealt with it and some companies didn't, basically. In a wider context, it's kind of the topics that we cover in the Cloud Arena area, which my colleague Dave will probably talk about shortly afterwards, where we organize, if you like, an ecosystem bringing providers and users of cloud services together to talk in a very practical sense about the trends and the challenges and the benefits of cloud and how it can be used, basically. And in true cloud sense, I'm using a cloud-based presentation service called Prezi, and we're just trying to get that fixed up at the moment. So just bear with us. Sorry about that, Dave. Okay. Okay, that's me. I'll get it from there. So when we talk about design for failure, what are we talking about in context? Well, traditionally, basically, with computer applications, even before the cloud came along, the whole approach basically was that the underlying infrastructure would be responsible. And particularly with the growth of virtualization, people said that if one server goes down, we'll make sure that we can get another server up and running really quickly. And that's fine, but people started to realize, particularly as users grew worldwide, as services grew worldwide, that put an awful lot of pressure on infrastructure, and there was a certain limit to which you go to. So people started to take a different approach and started to look at it from the point of view, well, failure is a risk that's there, so let's look at that and see the likelihood of that risk and the potential impact of that risk. And let's start building in alternatives in the case that failure should happen, and what are the likely failure scenarios that will happen, basically. So one of the principal things basically is the applications developer is really in control of availability. It's no longer seen as an infrastructure issue. It's really down to the application to have the various different scenarios built into it. And like any good activity, it's upfront, like other aspects of security. It's not something that's tacked on at the end after the application is ready and be in use. It's something that evolves along as the application evolves along. So cloud is changing the goalposts, because cloud is, for those who use the service really well, is starting to go back to some basics, and it's starting to say, for your service, our service, what are the acceptable risks? And what's the potential impact of those? And what do we have to compensate from? And also, basically, am I designing my application and the use of cloud services appropriately? And they're key questions. And sometimes in the rush to get applications live and in use and to generate money for them and to be using applications for a competitive advantage, sometimes these questions get missed. So basically, in a nutshell, what does design for failure involve? Well, the first thing is you don't really make any assumptions. You're not going to basically assume something else will happen. You're going to take full ownership. You're looking really clearly at redundancy. And for all the risks that you want to cover, you're going to have redundancy built in. You're going to have partition tolerance, so the idea that if we're using one particular aspect or partition in a server, there's full tolerance around that should anything go wrong with it. And that the application, if you like, can move should a problem happen with underlying infrastructure. And that for all the scenarios that you've designed for in terms of potential failure, you do have a response that's basically built in for that. So let's look at the Amazon outage that happened 2 years ago. Caused a widespread impact with a lot of large companies. But we're going to look at 2 companies in particular, Netflix and SmugMug, who basically sailed through the whole downtime and crisis while everybody else was panicking and trying to get services running. And it's interesting, Netflix published quite a good blog post on their technical blog, and they've kind of titled it Lessons We've Learned from the Amazon Outage, but I think the kind of subtitle, Dorothy, you're not in Kansas anymore, is really apt. Because with cloud services, it's not a case of very simply outsourcing to a data center. It's a very different delivery model, particularly in the public cloud, particularly in the whole idea of shared resources, that has a lot of advantages for businesses. And while some people may say, well, the Amazon outage really actually showed how cloud computing is not very reliable, what the lessons that if you look into how Netflix and SmugMug got through that crisis, it actually shows that cloud computing has a lot of advantages if you take the right approach to it, and in particular, part of that would be designed for failure. Some of the key points that came through from the Netflix, they knew straight away that using cloud services was very different than using on-premise because of that public shared model and that ability to scale up or down accordingly. And one of the services that they built at a very early stage was a program or a routine they called Chaos Monkey. And initially they used to use Chaos Monkey in their development environment, and they would just basically release it in the development environment. On a random basis, it would start to turn on and off services. And this would be part of their test cycle before they put their services live. And obviously they got so confident with it and their ability to deal with it that they actually release it, and they do continue to use it on their live system, because their live system is so well designed now for failure, and this was the proof of it with the Amazon outage. So all the scenarios that came up with that particular outage 2 years ago with Amazon had already happened in development and test, and when they happened in real life, basically Netflix had scenarios built in. So services would continue to run, but maybe some services would be degraded. So the video service, that would continue to run, but the suggestions to get possible alternatives based on what you viewed previously might run at a slower rate, for example. But they basically had all these particular scenarios covered. And the other thing was also, from an architecture point of view, they realized that cloud gave them the opportunity to learn with real scale solutions. So they didn't take a tiny test server in the corner of a data center. What they did was they looked and saw and reviewed their architecture on a real scale basis and tweaked it accordingly. And the other interesting thing from this, and back kind of in the previous presentation that Chuck said, the dedication, the enthusiasm, and the support for this approach, which initially some people might say is very risky, came from the very top. Design for failure is a philosophy right throughout Netflix, not just in the technology side. And the extra work that was required to build something like Chaos Monkey, the extra work that derives from using it initially in development and test, and then getting to a point where it's mature to use it in a live environment, basically comes from the very top, from the CEO. And he actively supports this. SmugMug, as some of you probably know, it's a photo sharing website, gears itself up to being quite secure and quite personalized in terms of how you want to share your photographs. The interesting thing there is, I mean, if you look back, Amazon have multi-availability zones, so they have different zones. And SmugMug made use of that, so if one availability zone is not available, there's another one there to take its place. They've also, like Netflix, used design for failure from a very early stage. It's a very prominent approach in their service design and delivery, basically. And for that reason, the development, test, and life cycle is obviously geared around it. But interestingly enough, one of the services Amazon provide is elastic storage. SmugMug don't use that. what they did basically was when they looked at their move to the cloud, and they see it as a journey, they're not fully there yet. They basically looked at that service amongst a range of other services and said, from a storage point of view, given the quality of content we have and the service we want to provide, it's not reliable and robust enough for us. So we have to design an alternative. And that's why I'm not sure where they are right now, but back then they were in a very much a hybrid environment where some of their data and services ran on their own data center, as well as some of it running on Amazon. And that basically is an interesting point where you may say that there are some aspects of the cloud that we'll use and there's some other services that we won't use. But again, in your design for failure, looking ahead, what are the scenarios we're potentially going to come up against and how are we going to deal with them? The interesting point that the CEO was asked was, you're a hybrid architecture, you use some cloud and you have some on-premise, so surely there was greater risk. And he made a very good point. If we were totally in our own data center and that data center went down, we would have been basically snookered. The cloud gives us access to on-demand, ubiquitous services from a server and a storage point of view. And it's a case of doing the appropriate design to it. So just the fact that you have your own data center is not a case in point, and we realize that. And he sees it very much as a journey that they will eventually have all their services on the cloud. So overall, there's a case to be made that cloud is a strength with the right design for failure approach. Interesting thing is, when you look at the Amazon case study, they're very much infrastructure services. It's a different set of services in the cloud than somewhere like platform. Platform services, whether it's Azure, Force.com, Heroku, Engine Yard, you pay a little bit more because you're getting some added security around it. So it's not a case that you have to look after the raw infrastructure services yourself. But the same principles still apply, that if you're going to deliver a service on a particular platform, what are the different scenarios you need to cater for, and based on potential problems that happen to that platform, how would you deal with it in the event that those scenarios happen? The other point that was made in a number of comments, and this is taken from one particular blog where someone said, yeah, the cloud is totally faulty. Someone said, try maintaining your services if you have everything in one data center and that data center goes down. And that data center can go down for a wide number of reasons in terms of communication lines being cut, problems with power generators, as well as a particular issue on any of the servers, etc. A lot of people more and more that are very experienced in the design for failure approach are really looking to cloud as a big opportunity to be able to put it into play and be able to deliver services on a very robust and quality fashion. So that's me, very short presentation, nothing terribly unique in it, but just basically saying that in a particular event like the Amazon data center outage, it was interesting to see two companies that basically were pretty much unimpacted by it and the approach that they took. So we can take some questions now, or we take some questions afterwards? Take them later. Thanks very much. Thank you.